go from one of my favorite times of the year, start of training camp, the fresh cut grass, first couple practices, all of the overreaction, and there has been a lot this summer, to one of my least favorites, first preseason game. Not because football's back, but because we go from overreaction to overanalysis. Giants 23, Patriots 21 in the opener. The Giants ending the Patriots' perfection again. Sorry to start on such a dark note, but Thursday night football at Gillette Stadium, never a bad thing. Now, the only bad thing that could come of this is, again, the overanalysis part, where as much as you and I want to dive into the details, we got to take a big picture look. I said this ad nauseum a couple of episodes ago. The truth is in the trends. As far as the preseason goes, we don't have any trends yet, but we do have 4 takeaways today. We're going to run down the same qualifiers I did at our What Did We Learn from Training Camp episode. Everybody gets it. We all know the games don't count. The best players aren't playing. The schemes are simple. The objective isn't even to win, if we're really being frank, because if you listen to Bill Belichick, before he told me not to worry about the offensive play caller situation, he said he was glad that they competed hard, competed well throughout the end of the game. Brian Daboll, the Giants head coach, said the same thing. And you're going to get that a lot in the regular season. But they mentioned that first because that's the goal in the preseason. They want to see hard, fundamentally sound play from everyone on the roster when they get the chance. If you get that, even if you lose on a last-second field goal, that's what matters. We all get that. This is not real NFL football. That said, Thursday night, the most surprising thing to me, even, again, understanding preseason, we got 0.0% of the new offense. The Patriots hid the things we've seen for 2+ weeks in training camp very, very well. And I wrote about this immediately after the game, so go find that on bostonherald.com. But when you look at the numbers, as I'm charting every single play by formation, personnel grouping, spot on the field, drive-in distance, the players, et cetera, they played with 11 personnel, which is 3 wide receivers, 1 running back, and 1 tight end, for 87% of their snaps. And it was the same guys coming in now. Part of that was health, because you're resting Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith, your top 2 tight ends. Devin Asiasi banged up with what used to be a hand, is now a quad injury, so he sits. So Matt Sokol is the only tight end available, and God bless him, plays almost the entire game. So they run out with that. You also look at the type of plays that they're running. The passing plays didn't have a single play fake in them. That's 0% play action for the first time that I've ever seen. Now, there's a reason for that, and we'll get to it later. Then you look on the ground. We've all been talking about outside zone. Outside zone this, pair with the inside zone. They only ran 7 plays at that outside zone scheme where you see all of the linemen take the same step laterally at the snap and block more of an area than a man. And they didn't run, of course, any play action off of that, as I just said. And so you have an offense that's running the same players out there, that's not running the same plays that we've seen in training camp, and all the while ran just 1 RPO, which has started to been incorporated more in the last couple of practices. And so I tweeted about that if you want to see the clip of the RPO. Now, I mentioned before we would get into why the Patriots didn't run any play action, because I asked Bill Belichick this on Friday. And his only answer was the Giants were doing certain things that made us have to manage the game in a certain way, which was basically answering the Giants blitzed Bailey Zappi, 4th-round rookie Bailey Zappi, on half of his snaps, including a couple all-out cover 0 blitz. Here comes 6 to 7 guys at you. Let's see what you got. Bailey Zappi, to his credit, did well in those circumstances, 12 of 16 when he was under pressure, which wasn't all of those blitzes. But the point is that he can't turn his back on a defense like that. So I think they probably had some small package of play action passes, including the ones that we've seen where you've got the outside zone fake to one side, bootleg back around. Didn't run any of that. So the Patriots have 2 more games that will be available for the entire public to see, of course, in addition to their joint practices with the Panthers next week and the Raiders after that in Las Vegas. But as far as the rest of the league knows, the only new offense that's there is the one I'm describing, the one that my colleagues are describing on the beat. And you're getting some mixed messages. How much of it is Shannon, how much of it is not? I had a thread on this earlier. I actually ran into Al Groh, former Patriots assistant, Jets head coach, University of Virginia, all this different stuff. Worked with Belichick dating back to the 80s with the Giants. He reminded me, and I think I'm going to connect with Al for a story later about this, so this is kind of podcast exclusive. Belichick was running outside zone and then pairing it with a bootleg back in 1992. So that's his first year with the Browns, Bernie Kosar. A couple years later, gets rid of Bernie Kosar for Vinny Testaverde, partly because Vinny was a little bit more mobile. And that's when they started running not just the outside zone, but pairing it with the bootlegs that Kosar could only run maybe once or twice a game. So this has been in the playbook for a while. Again, it's TBD and how much that's going to be a hallmark of this offense. But the offense, again, that you saw on Thursday night is nothing like it will be. And credit to the Patriots, I guess, for hiding that, basically, as well as the identity of their next play caller. Takeaway number 2, this one you could see at home, right? The wide receiver competition is really heating up. You see Tyquan Thornton there with the touchdown in the end zone, gets free in the exact same route on back-to-back plays. Christian Wilkerson, after Tyquan Thornton smoked his man downfield, did the same in a little go route. So you look at the stat sheet after this game, and you've got Christian Wilkerson at the top near 100 yards. After him, little Jordan Humphrey, 6 catches, 62 yards. Between them, Trey Nixon, 81 or 82 yards. And you go, okay, not bad, but guys are probably not going to make the roster. Well, those guys a couple of years ago, in case you don't remember, would have been the 4th or 5th best receiver on this team. So the whole depth might not be filled with top tier talent, but the competition here is getting fiercer by the day, because you go back to just 2019, Brady's last year. And again, not a great year for weapons, but that's kind of been the case the last 3-4 years. The projected starters at that point of the preseason game were Maurice Harris and Philip Dorsett, with a rookie Jacoby Myers, who had played most of his college career at quarterback, filling in behind them. Okay. So you go from that top 3 or 4 to 4 guys who didn't even have to play on Thursday night. That's a huge upgrade. I'm not saying there's going to be a huge shakeup, and we'll get to more receiver stuff in the mailbag. But I think if you're a fan at home, you have to be very comfortable that, unlike last season, where you had Nelson Aguilar, Kendrick Bourne, and Jacoby Myers as your top 3. And if one of them got hurt, you're going, okay, Christian Wilkerson, second-year dude from practice squad, come on up. You've got some options here now between Wilkerson, Nixon, probably not Humphrey, but of course, Tyquan Thornton. Like, Tyquan Thornton right now technically is your number 5 receiver, second-round rookie who is looking very good. And I can tell you the staff is very, very happy with, which you can tell by the way that they're downplaying anything publicly. But he's getting with the program, and he is getting open, and that's about all you need to do to play receiver for the Patriots. Okay, number 3, defensively, again, you're not seeing the starters out here. They're not running anything complex. The Giants' offensive line still looks like dog shit. So there's not a lot to take. But personally, I still have questions about this run defense. And this is as much of a function of what we saw Thursday night as the fact that they've only had 5 padded practices. So the run defense, just like your run offense, is going to take a little while to catch up. And you would probably counter with, well, the run offense for the Patriots has sucked in practice, so the run defense might be good. And that could be the case. But in 2021, this was a bottom 10 defense on the interior by yards per carry allowed and yards per game allowed. So when you have a guy like Carl Davis, who played pretty well against the Giants, he was probably one of the 10 best players of the Patriots, maybe even top 5. But besides him, you're giving up 177 yards with potential starters Raekwon McMillan, who's been repping with Juwan Belly with the first team defense in training camp, and Mac Wilson, whose speed was on display. But the Giants are still getting through, and you're having troubles on the edge where Josh Uche is not starting and Anthony Jennings has been fine. The run defense, to me, you still want to see a little bit more, because this was an elite pass defense up until the final stretch of last season. But the run defense was touch and go, and that was with their best players. Now you've got a 32-year-old Lawrence guy projected to start. Sure, Christian Barmore is going to be, much better here. He's going to make that year 2 leap. If there was a drinking game in this podcast, I swear year 2 leap would have to be at the top of just instant shot. We'll cut down on that. But Godchow, Belichick thinks is one of the best defensive linemen in the league. I would say statistically, and from the film that I've watched, whether it was in Miami or here, that's true about 3 to 4 games per year. You need a lot more of that, and you need more from guys like Raekwon McMillan and Mac Wilson, and as I mentioned, guys on the edge, including Henry Anderson, who's a run-first player and played on Thursday night, to tighten up this run defense. It's not about the 177 yards, but it's that being another data point in the last 12 to 18 months where you go, if they really want to tighten up this defense, you have to start in the ground. Or teams like Miami, who had the worst offensive line in the league last year and pounded you out for 195 yards, are going to do that now that they have an actual offensive line, including an all-pro in Tryon Armstead. So number 4, last takeaway, and then we'll get to the mailbag. The depth for this team, and I said this, I think, in my Nuggets episode right before training camp started, things I was hearing after calling around and checking in. The Patriots were very excited about the depth of the roster. So far, through 2 full weeks of training camp and now a preseason game, that's borne out. You have position battles, and again, position battles could be starters in one area or backups in the other. But backups at a place like running back, where you can count on Damian Harris to miss probably 3 to 4 games this year, given the nature of his position and his history, you're going to need a third running back to really be solid in there. And Ty Montgomery rested on Thursday night. Good for Ty Montgomery. But Ty Montgomery has not cracked 300 offensive yards since 2018. Okay. Think about how much life has changed, not just for the Patriots, then Super Bowl champions in 2018, but for yourself. Ty Montgomery's not that player anymore. So can you count on him? Or could it be J.J. Taylor in case someone needs to back up Ramondre Stevenson whenever this comes around? It might be Pierre Strong or Kevin Harris, who basically split all of the snaps in the final 3 quarters. And Kevin Harris had a worse performance, even though he's played more in training camp. He gave up a quarterback hit and blitz pickup. He, of course, scored that 1 rushing touchdown. But Pierre Strong looked better to me in the small flashes that he had, as much as they were relying on an offensive line that was, again, struggling with the outside zone to block. You go from running back to wide receiver. We talked about, again, we'll talk about again, offensive line. Who's the swing tackle on this team? Okay. And some of this is bad, right? Like Justin Rohan false started twice. Yadni Kajus gave up a quarterback hit and a run stuff. Both of them got dinged up. They're playing a lot out there. But let's stop about the swing tackle for a second. Let's go up a level on the depth chart. Who's playing right tackle? Okay. Isaiah Wynn's been gone the last 3 either practices or now this game. And you look at the right side of that offensive line, when Justin Herron filled in for him on Monday, he got pulled the next day because he couldn't run block. And Kajus was better on Tuesday, which was a lower intensity practice. But the depth there is churning. It's just a little bit more concerning. On the flip side, the pass rush looks good. And I feel like I've written this story maybe week 1 or week 2 of the preseason that the pass rush is teeming with potential. It certainly was last year when Judon got here. But at least you have bodies. This is where you have numbers, and it's a little bit more comforting because of the way the Patriots structure their pass rush. It's not entirely about isolating their best player. It's about running games, setting basically picks as you go around or different stunts. Like you got guys like Uche and Jennings who both had 3 and then 4 pressures respectively. Sam Roberts. You guys remember Sam Roberts, 6th-round rookie from a school you and I had never heard of before the NFL draft, comes in, he had 4 pressures. Now 3 of them were on 1 series, but at least that's another guy who hasn't flashed in training camp, but can be a mismatch on the inside, even for Evan Neal, who was the number 7 overall pick for the Giants and is on that offensive line. So between him, Daniel Akewale, who kind of like Christian Wilkerson of the defense, is going to bounce from the practice squad to the roster. You have bodies in there in the event of injury, in the event of a better matchup against a particular offensive line that might struggle with speed 1 week versus power the next. You've got bodies there. And we'll wrap up with the depth there at cornerback. Malcolm Butler still doesn't look like his old self. Again, it's hard to expect that at 32 after a year off. Terrence Mitchell, though, allowed just 1 catch. He had the forced fumble, of course. Behind him, Sean Wade had 2 pass breakups, if you include the BS pass interference call, and allowed just 2 catches on 7 targets. So that's a guy who I had pigeonholed into being really a slot corner, but he plays on the perimeter for all of Thursday night and holds his own. So I look at him as a guy that, where we talked about they have a surplus of defenders in the slot. If he could play in the outside, he now enters the conversation with Jonathan Jones, who's bounced outside the last couple of weeks. Of course, Jalen Mills, Terrence Mitchell, and then someone like Jack Jones, because Marcus Jones, the 3rd-round rookie who rested Thursday night, with all the starters, like he seems to have the nickel job, at least for now. But whether it's Mills opposite Jack Jones or Terrence Mitchell or John Jones, you have options there now. So the depth is basically one of these guys is going to hit. Okay, the way they approach this is we're going to make a bunch of cheap bets. They're long odds individually, but the more of those you stack up, the more likely it is it's going to hit, whether it's a receiver or a corner or a backup running back. And those seem to be playing out the way that the Patriots want. Okay, let's wrap this up with a mailbag. Again, I teased the receiver part a couple of times, so we'll get this from Twitter, McGarvin L at Patriots POV. How would you personally sort out the wide receiver situation? The only player that doesn't look like a factor at this point is Hammond. You're right. Josh Hammond didn't look great Thursday night, while the rest of the guys did. So as I see it on the depth chart, and this accounts for productivity in training camp, they're fit within the system. It's Jacoby Myers number 1 right now through 2.5 weeks. Then you have a step down. I would put Kendrick Bourne / Devontae Parker there for the 2 or 3. I think, of course, this could change as we go on. But Bourne has really disappeared the last week from team drills. And Devontae Parker, that's kind of the nature of his game. A lot of the 50-50 balls is where he wins on the field through his size, through his body control, his catch radius. But again, you flip a coin enough times, you're going to have a string of 4 heads or 4 tails. And in his case, he's been missing for a while, and now he's starting to come back. So I think that's just going to be the kind of streaky nature of his game, especially with those, again, 50-50 balls. After those top 3, I would go Tyquan Thornton / Nelson Agholor. And Agholor really becomes the most interesting man in this room, not because he's pounding Dos Equis, but because he's, of course, got a sizable cap hit, where the Patriots, if they release him, would take on $10 million in dead money. They would free up more than $4 million in cap space. And if his level of play is about equal to Tyquan Thornton at the end of the month, I think releasing him is a real possibility, because teams are going to look at him and you might say, oh, why don't they just trade him instead, get a 7th round pick? Teams are going to look at that depth chart and say, if the Patriots are trying to give us their number 4 receiver, a team with probably a bottom 10, bottom 12 receiving core in the league. And again, that's just where they stack up as far as receivers go. It's not in terms of total skill position talent. Like, why are we going to take on Nelson Agholor for $10 million a year? So I don't know where that's headed. Again, they're really happy with Tyquan Thornton, but the way that Devontae Parker gets hurt and his injury history, I think they feel more comfortable with a solid top 5. Again, we talk about the depth and how much different this is, not only just from last year, but from 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago. Those are your top 5. And I think those are the orders where you have a tier of Myers, Thornton, Parker, then you get to Agholor and Tyquan Thornton. But the next couple of weeks of training camp joint practices are going to be really key, I think, for those two. Is, do we see Tyquan Thornton continue to ascend? Nelson Agholor decline, stay steady? Because right now they're pretty neck and neck. As for the last 3 spots, Trey Nixon to me, again, is kind of his own tier 4. Then you've got little Jordan Humphrey / Christian Wilkerson. Humphrey's a 3rd-year player, as is Wilkerson. I think Wilkerson is getting closer to being a known commodity. He won very well against man coverage last night. But it's still just the Giants' second stringers. So he tested very well coming out of college. You just haven't seen him materialize. And I think right now, in the way he's being, used in training camp and the type of snaps he's getting, the coaches aren't sold on some sort of imminent leap coming. So I think you've got a very firm top 5. And then Trey Nixon might make this roster based on his special teams contributions, because he was in on 3 different special teams against the Giants. And we'll see how long that continues, because, again, Bethel, Slater, Cody Davis were sitting. But if he can cover kicks and fill in as kind of your backup slot, that's a very valuable position on this roster. Okay, this comes from Truck. That is Truck on Twitter. Is it possible that none of the fringe wide receivers make the roster, with the hopes that at least one will make it through to the practice squad as backup? Hell yeah. Basically, the last 3 guys that I mentioned, for all the reasons I just said. Trey Nixon's on the bubble. His special teams impact is going to play a big role. I think they'd love to have Christian Wilkerson back as the dude who just kind of, takes the bus to and from the practice squad to the active roster, back down, et cetera, or a little Jordan Humphrey, who, had 6 catches, 62 yards and the touchdown against the Giants, but all of those were in the second half, okay, which tells you when the Patriots saw fit to play him relative to everybody else, and also the level of competition that he was facing. It was a good night for him. I hope he builds on it and plays his best football. So if he doesn't stick here, he might stick somewhere else. But I think he's still very much in that tier. All right, the last one that we have here. How do you sort out the safeties? I think this is also from Truck. Bledsoe has been making a push, and Elliott looked pretty good. Could we see a surprise cut or trade at that position? I have no reason to believe so far that Jalen Elliott, aside from leading the team in tackles, which in the preseason really just means you played more than everyone else, is generally not a good thing, is going to make the roster. He's literally the 83rd or 84th or whatever they're at right now player on the roster. Maybe Brad Hawkins is one step below, but I would take him out right now unless there's some sort of huge leap, as much as he played Thursday night, because let's just look at the top of the depth chart, the top of the roster. You've got 3 stone cold, forget about it locks here. You've got Devin McCourty, Adrian Phillips, and Kyle Duggar. Then you've got the tiny bump down in this tier of the don't get arrested, don't just forget how to play football or show up to practice drunk tier. You're going to make the team, which consists of Jabril Peppers, and I think Joshua Bledsoe. And Peppers, because of the contract, because of his fit in this defense, of course, familiarity with Judge. We've also seen him join the returners in training camp. But Bledsoe has been rotating very frequently with the starters. I think they like him both as kind of a half-field safety when they go too deep, and also someone who can play over the slot. So he's part of that group that brings his value is in the versatility. And speaking of which, Miles Bryant also factors into that conversation. So he had the 30-yard punt return against the Giants. He started at nickelback, where I think it's really going to be matchup dependent because they kind of have to hide him. Like, as smart as Miles Bryant might be, and he's quick and he's got good ball skills, he's 5'5", 5 or 5 and 8.5, 5'9" maybe, and still gets pushed around a little bit. So they can't have him there get torched by Isaiah McKenzie whenever they see the Bills, and that's really the problem. So let's just say 5 locks, and then you've got hybrids in Miles Bryant, and even Jonathan Jones, who they might bounce back to safety on occasion, as we've seen the last 3 years. So not to mention Jalen Mills. I just don't think you're going to see a trade here because you've got 3 guys you really want in the roster. This is a strength of your position. I get the idea of dealing for surplus to address one of your weaknesses. But, I mean, if you want to pitch me a trade involving a McCourty, a Phillips, or a Duggar, God bless you. I don't think anyone wants Jabril Peppers based on his market, which we saw in free agency. And Joshua Bledsoe, if he's ascending, they're just going to keep him because he's under team control at a very low price as a former 6th-round pick for years to come. So that's about it. We got 4 big takeaways, more mailbag questions. We'll have 2 more podcasts next week, but the bi-weekly thing's gone pretty well. The bi-weekly, I think, as far as I know, has a dual definition, meaning either twice within a week or once within 2 weeks, which is really problematic, but we'll solve that for another day. In the meantime, have a great weekend. Have a couple more beers. We might do this with a couple of guys who I'm talking with on the beat in Vegas when they go to joint practices. But before that, we'll have joint practices against the Panthers here Tuesday, Wednesday. If you have a minute, get down to Foxborough. Joint practices are always the most physical and fun parts of training camp that you'll see any time of year. And then roster projection. We will have one of those next week, either just another solo episode or another guest. But until then, we'll see you.